Hello there. The purpose of this video is to help you understand how forms work in HTML. We're also going to discuss briefly about what happens when you submit a form. I'm going to start off by creating a pretty simple file, login.html. I want to stress to you that this isn't a lesson on how to write good HTML. It's a lesson on this whole idea of forms, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and make a fairly simple file here. Oops. Okay, so right away we kind of get to the first big idea with forms. So the action helps us to direct where should data be sent, or what file should be called when we click the submit button. It's sort of saying the same thing. So when I click submit, whatever has been entered into the form is going to be sent to a file called login.php. And then the method talks about how that data should be sent. So once again, these are two really important ideas. You have the form action, which answers the question, where should the data go? Where should the form data go when I click submit? And the method talks about how that should be passed. And honestly, we almost always use post. There's a few times when we use get, but for your projects, you should almost always have post. Okay, so anything that's inside the form tags is going to be processed. Anything outside the form tags won't be processed. So now we get into this idea of input types, and I want to stress to you again, this isn't beautiful HTML. This is about how does a form work, okay? So I'm going to log in like this, and then I'm going to make an input type. And with an input type, there's two sort of really important things. The type of the input, which is out of the scope of this lesson, but there's a bunch of different types. And then the name, which is in the scope of this lesson. I'm going to do login name, okay? This is an input type, and the name is going to turn into a variable that is passed from login.html to login.php. This needs to be unique. You can't have the same name here in the same form. I guess we could say maybe for checkboxes or something like that, but most of the time this needs to be unique. Okay, so here again we have a type password, and then we have name equals user password. And you'll find out why that name is so important in just a moment. I'm going to make another line break here, and then we're going to end. Button type is going to be submit. Click here to log in. Okay? I'm going to save this. And then if you wanted to look at this, let me just show you what it looks like. So that is going to be here. Okay, so pretty straightforward. I can enter a login name, and I can enter in a password, and then I can click here to log in. This is the basic way that a form works, okay? So once again, you've got the opening form tag. The opening form tag has two parts, an action, which talks about where the data should be sent from the form. And then method talks about how that data should be passed, okay? And then for our input types, the two things that we need to have is a type, because there's different types of input types. And then finally, a name, which is a unique identifier for that specific input type. And you always want to make sure there's no spaces in here. In general, we like to keep it all lowercase. It depends upon how you name your variables. It doesn't matter. These should also be really clear. So you shouldn't, for example, put X. That would be a horrible name for it. I'm going to call this, it's a login name. Okay, make sure this makes sense. So that's the end of part one. Okay, so a very simple form here, and you had a chance to see what it looks like. We'll get into processing this in the next lesson.